What I'd like to do now is just kind of go down the line here and have each of the panelists introduce themselves very briefly, and then we'll start getting to the heart of the matter, as they say. Gordon?
Okay, I guess Gordon Quan, longtime Houstonian, been practicing immigration law for 40 years, and during that time seen a lot of changes as the law has evolved. Some of you may know I served on the Houston City Council, where I helped work with Mayor Brown on the Mayor's Office for Immigration and Refugee Affairs to see how we could make Houston a more welcoming city. Also working with Mayor Turner on that same concept. Active with the National League of Cities, looking at how we could, as a country, cities around the country could adapt to this changing demographic. So happy to be here tonight.
Well, good evening. I'm Mike Holland. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Marek. We're an 80-year-old family-owned specialty subcontractor, offices across Texas and in the Southeast. I'm a fourth-generation Houstonian, product of the University of Houston for a couple of years, blue-collar craft professional for Marek, and we believe people are our number one resource, so we're passionate advocates for the workforce and fiercely believe we need to solve this problem or our entire proposition will be endangered.
Good evening. My name is Geoffrey Hoffman. I'm the clinical director of the Immigration Clinic at the University of Houston Law Center. I've taught the Immigration Clinic and immigration law, criminal immigration issues, and asylum law here at UH. I've been here for 9 years, and I'm very pleased to be part of this panel and to be part of the project. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Gordon, we'll start out with you. There's obviously been a lot of things that have happened on the immigration front just in the last few months and the last few weeks since the videos have come out. Where do you see things standing at this moment with regards to immigration, and talk a little bit about why this issue becomes so divisive for Americans?
Well, I think we're at a time in our history where we're seeing a changing demographic. And there's always been in the history of immigration a fear of the other, whether it was Italians or Jews or Chinese or whatever group was coming. Because it wasn't the same as it had been in the past, people are like, hey, what's going on here? So that fear has dominated immigration forever. Actually, Truman vetoed the 1952 Act, saying it was the most racist bill he'd ever seen. It was overturned, his veto was overturned by the Republican Congress. But you know, I don't know, I'm an eternal optimist. And while this is contentious, as a former politician, I think we can find some middle ground. But it has to be give and take in everything. Nobody's gonna get everything they want. The president has laid out some of his ideas. Durbin Graham, other groups have brought bills. I think there's room for compromise.
Okay. And let me remind the panelists, if there's anything you want to follow up on or any other points, feel free to jump in, because we're trying to make this more of a discussion than a lecture. But Mike, let me turn to you. You've focused obviously a lot on the workforce issue, and that plays into this. We saw in the film you talked a little bit about the issue with the labor shortage, and especially in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. Why can't we find Americans to do these jobs? I think that's probably one of the questions I'm most asked about immigration.
Well, I think the current reality, where we have several million undocumented in the country, has led to some unsustainable business practices. And because we've been operating under the assumption that there are plenty of people available, then the wages, which is just one part of a complex equation, are low. And I don't think that these jobs are seen as valuable jobs by U.S. citizens. I think that's a reality. It's an unfortunate reality. As long as we stay in the system we're in, where we have a significant number of people here, but we legally do not acknowledge their existence, then we're going to continue to undervalue that. They're losers on both ends. Americans who might entertain these jobs, although I think the demographic of younger citizens is different in the kind of careers they're interested in. But we've basically in a race to the bottom, and until we can bring a a significant portion of the workforce out of the shadows, and then in fact have those wages and that value go up, then people are not going to flock to the jobs.
So is it a question of, I mean, couldn't employers just raise the wages they were paying and attract workers that way?
Well, as I said, it's very complex. So you can raise a wage, and if you think that $20 will get a worker that 15 won't, but it's straight inflation. And so someone pays for that cost in the myriad of products that a construction worker can participate in, not the least of which is our houses, our apartments and rents and office, any other number of things. And people have to compete for that. But if we're going to bring people out of the shadows, we have to bring them out in a uniform way where everyone has equal access to the workforce. That's part of the problem we have now. So raising wages is an extremely inflationary move. It does not necessarily mean we have more value, it just means we paid more. And we're headed that way anyway because we have a workforce problem where we're going to be forced to pay more because of extreme demand, and our poor practices, whether they be immigration or workforce development, are going to lead straight to costs that people will not want to absorb.
Well, Loren, can I just add, we're at a 40-year low as far as unemployment at this time. I'm working with a number of companies that do fairly low-skilled work, such as retail fast food chains and home health care agencies and things like that. They cannot find people, and they're stealing each other's people as it is. And so, we are not replenishing a lot of jobs. We actually did have a lull in immigration at one time. That was during the recession in 1929. And actually, we also had a fairly lull in 2009 when we had a recession. So it's a function of jobs. If there weren't jobs, there wouldn't be people coming. So it's not like people are just coming to leech on the welfare system. So having enough workers, we are a growing economy. I know as a council member, our growth in Houston was because of immigration. And if we didn't have that growth, we would have been in recession like some of the cities in the Northeast.
Well, Geoffrey, let's follow up on that a little bit. When we talk about people coming here because of jobs, one of the arguments we frequently hear is, well, it's fine that they come here. Why don't they come the right way? We have laws. Let's enforce them. Sometimes you hear, what part of legal don't you understand? How do you respond to that?
I'm glad you asked me that question because I can talk about immigration law because that's what I teach, and I've been an immigration attorney now for I guess about 15, 20 years. I think that the issue that I want to emphasize when I talk about immigration is that it's not a black and white kind of category. So people, if you hear the rhetoric about, well, this person's legal, this person's illegal, or we don't like all the illegals, we hate illegals. And what I talk about when I teach this in my immigration law class is that actually you can be undocumented, okay, or you can have entered without inspection, which is the technical term called EWI. But at the same time, you can be eligible for a range of different types of relief. So there's what's missing from the national debate is a nuanced understanding of immigration laws in that, it's estimated in the city of Houston, we have between 400,000 and 500,000 undocumented people just in the Houston area, and it's estimated about half of those are eligible for some type of relief. And if you talk to people in the community and they have no idea what you're talking about, what does that mean? What is relief? Well, it depends on the situation. They may have relief such as being able to have a relative petition for them. They may be able to get some sort of a waiver. They may be able, if they're in proceedings in front of an immigration judge, there's a variety of things the immigration judge could grant: cancellation of removal, or asylum, or withholding of deportation, or various things. So again, not everybody is going to be able to avail themselves of that type of relief. Not everybody is going to understand what that relief is because they would need to have a consultation with a competent immigration attorney. But again, I think that's a very important facet of the debate, and I think if people understood that, then they would be more open to things like deferred action for childhood arrivals, and they would be more open to comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, since you mentioned DACA, let's follow up on that. I mean, that's obviously been something that's in the news lately. It helped contribute to the shutdown of the government. You know, why is that so contentious when it seems that everybody's in agreement on the solution?
I think you're right that the vast majority of Americans are in agreement. You know, and I think that the Deferred Action Program obviously has been under fire from various groups, but the important thing I think to realize is that you have 700 to 800,000 people have been granted DACA. And out of that, in Texas, I think it's like 124,000 people in Texas have DACA. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, do we as a society want to penalize a group who, through no fault of their own, have been brought here? I mean, do we penalize people without in law school we call it mens rea, the intent. So there's a lot of reasons to focus on that population, and you know, I think it's a very, very easy kind of first step in the step to comprehensive immigration reform, and unfortunately it has become a political issue.
Well, Mike, I know that Marek's been very focused on comprehensive immigration reform over the years. Is that still something that's achievable, or do we need baby steps, do you think? Or
Well, I don't know if I know the answer to that. I think you do have to look at the entire system, whether our tolerance is right for that. I don't know. Responding to your first question, we can't talk about it without it being emotional. They should be here, they shouldn't be here, and I think the first thing we have to do is try to take the emotion out of it, have more of an economic discussion, to Gordon's point about what our unemployment rate is. If there are 10 or 11 million people here and they came for a reason and those reasons are jobs, then the discussion may be what is the most appropriate way to engage them formally in the workforce. But if that acknowledgement is never made, then there's this injustice been perpetrated, and I think that's, I guess, why we're having a discussion about the rational middle, but we got to get out of an emotional state about people being here and not deserving something, and that people need jobs, businesses need workers. Seems like lots of data about our workforce challenges, but when it comes to an immigration debate, there is no discussion about that. And honestly, I think that on either side of the debate, one talks about what is right, and one talks about what is wrong, and we never talk about what we need as a country. And if we could determine what we needed, then we could articulate steps about how the people that are here, we're still talking about who should be and who shouldn't. Nobody ever talks about the 11 million people who are here who are working. And that's, I think, the elephant in the room.
And Gordon, you know, we talk about these economic issues, but we've never really had an immigration law or immigration policy based on economics. Why is that? It's so fundamental to the prosperity of the country.
Well, you know, Loren, when immigration laws were first formulated, the idea was family reunification, that people wanted to be rejoined with family members from overseas. You know, I've been practicing so long, I remember when we had leftover visas, actually. If a person had $10,000, they could show, hey, there's leftover visas, I want to immigrate, and you could do that. But the world has changed a lot since in those 40 years, to tell you the truth. And the family categories, where they used to be very open for a brother or sister to sponsor their sibling, that waiting line now is anywhere from 14 to 25 years. And I think that, and the question you asked, Mike, do we need comprehensive immigration reform? I think we do. I think we need to look at the system we have, if it's working or not working. You know, my wife sponsored her siblings because their kids wanted to come to college here. That would not work today, because the kids would be 21 and over by the time their number ever came up. So maybe that's not where we need to be. So back to your question, why haven't we looked at employment? We do have employment. That's the second wave. First thing is family, second is employment. But those numbers have been fairly small in comparison to how we've looked at family. So I think that as this economy has evolved and as the world has evolved, we do need to put more emphasis on employment-based immigration. How we do that is yet to be determined. One of the things, and I'll switch briefly to Germany, you know, when all those refugees were coming to Germany and Angela Merkel said, hey, we'll take them, a lot of people said, what? Why are you doing that? 1 million people? And it's because they recognized that the German economy, the people were getting old. Mike mentioned that in his video there, that 10,000 people are reaching 65 every day, and that they needed that fresh blood of new people. Rice University has a study called the carrying principle. Are there enough workers in our economy to support those who are not working? Because the kids who aren't working, going to school, then you look at the senior citizens who are not working, are there enough workers? We need workers to come in to make sure that we keep the economy afloat. We don't go into deficit like we're seeing in Japan that's been in recession for several years and other parts of the world. So, I'm sorry, it's a long answer to a short question, but my answer would be, we need comprehensive immigration reform, we need to look at what categories we have, and we need to look at what are the best needs for the country. And I think that's a rational middle that people can agree upon.
I just want to add about how broken the system is. I think that people don't really understand or appreciate how broken it is. So for example, the immigration court system, you know, that I deal with immigration cases as part of the clinic. They have a 600,000 backlog, 600,000 cases. That's just astounding. You know, in Houston, I think it's around 35,000 backlog. You know, it's going to take years and years and years to get through that. And so I'm frustrated as an immigration attorney because I want my clients to go through the immigration system, the immigration court system, because a lot of them have legitimate forms of relief. And so I don't want the system to take a long time. I don't want people to be detained for years and years and years and have to file habeas petitions. But comprehensive immigration reform is important, not just for the reasons, you know, obviously to invigorate the economy and to help the GDP, but also it's important to fix the system we have now because it's utterly broken, including the immigration court system and the visa backlog. We could talk about the visa bulletin. You have some of these countries it's taking 15, 20 years to get a priority date. And as Gordon was alluding to, brothers and sisters, it's not even realistic that they're going to be able to immigrate legally.
Loren, I'd like to follow up on the sort of the job discussion, and this was mentioned in the first video. But I think that it's safe to say that a significant percentage of those that are in the country on an undocumented basis have jobs. I think it's foolish to believe that they're all paying taxes. Yes, anyone can get a taxpayer ID number, but I think I'd be remiss not to, especially being in the construction business, not to acknowledge there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of workers who access those jobs in our multifamily and residential businesses, and in an increasing number in our commercial businesses who do not pay taxes, who cannot in fact be employed by legitimate contractors who pay payroll tax or income tax, and there is zero coordination between the IRS and the Department of Labor. So there is no mechanism to root that out. And if we were to somehow say, well, everyone is here and they are in these jobs, we would perpetuate this myth. Now, as consumers, they may pay tax. I don't dispute there is some tax there, but we have to have some form of tax similar to the visa programs we have, where if you're going to have a visa, you work for an employer where you're paid a prevailing wage for the area and you pay taxes. But there are, again, thousands and thousands of workers who do not do that. And in fact, if you make $20 an hour and you have no deduction, that's a pretty darn good job. And we see that every day as an employer struggling to figure out what is in fact a legal worker. There are those that have fraudulent documents, but on their face are legitimate. That's the billions that are going into Social Security. But there's other state and federal unemployment taxes and income taxes that are not being paid. And we have to be able to make sure, that's the problem with 11 million people. They're not in anyone's system appropriately, so the money or the economic impact they have is not measured effectively anywhere because we really refuse to acknowledge their existence.
Well, and let me just follow up on that because this kind of gets into an area that you know well, but talk a little bit about how this plays out from an employment standpoint, because it is possible for an employer to legally hire an illegal immigrant. And I know we talked about that before, but maybe you just kind of, without going too far down in the weeds, just sort of explain generally how that works.
Well, it came up on another discussion about the TPS, but you are required to require certain documents in order to prove your legitimate hiring, the I-9 process. You in fact have to take them. If you give me a social security number and it has the right number of digits and on its face it's legit, I have to take it. And if I don't take it, then we could have action from discrimination. So I could hire someone who I think is legal, and in fact find out later that they're not, and then could have an audit, could have something turn up on a health insurance. We provide benefits and we renew someone, find out their documents are not good, and we let them go. The problem is they just go around the corner and go to work for someone else. And so we're just moving them around, and in fact their value proposition actually decreases each time that happens. You have others who don't even have fraudulent documents, but all of these steps required because we refuse to acknowledge that they're here. So there's no way for business to build a workforce policy when they have no way to determine who's actually a legal worker. And that can't be put on businesses to make that decision every day at point of hire. Our government has to decide, let's get a tamper-proof ID where we know absolutely who's here, and we are required to treat them all the same. But this has caused an enormous problem, and I think it's in all industries, but certainly it is dominating the construction industry, and it's right in the middle of the road. It's a huge obstacle as we talk about workforce development, and that's being had in a very robust way here. But again, the elephant in the room is what happens to those that you cannot ensure will be in your workforce on a long-term basis. So people say, I don't want to be an employer. I'll just hire contractors.
And Gordon, I wanted to come back to a point you were talking about, that originally a lot of immigration law was based around this sense of family, but now we hear lawmakers talking about chain migration as if it's a bad thing. Have we kind of completely gone the opposite direction there in terms of some of the way we're looking at these issues?
Well, I think this chain migration issue just suddenly came out of that episode in New York where suddenly Trump came up with this idea, because that goes counter to everything we've been doing for so many years. I know with, for instance, our Asian families, we look at an extended family, we care about our brothers and our sisters. But I think as time is going on, more and more skills are seemingly in need. And so studies have shown both ways, Loren, that people who are sponsored by family members adjust because they have somebody to help them adjust to the society, and they become acculturated. But also people who have a job skill that they can bring to the society also work well. So I guess the question is there going to be a give and take? Who gets left out in the equation if we have to make a choice? As you see, Trump has said, okay, I'm willing to give you DACA, build the wall, knock out diversity, and let's look at the quota system. So I think that's the criteria we're looking at right now. And our family's going to get squeezed out. The idea is at least to grandfather those people who've been waiting in line for so long and let them on notice that in the future you may not be able to come that avenue. I think that's what we're looking at as a reasonable alternative. And that's what we looked at in 2013, actually, when the bill would have come out of, the Gang of Eight had that bill.
I just I was going to bring up the Senate bill, this 2013, that passed the Senate, and so that was comprehensive immigration reform, and it was very close. I mean, we almost had comprehensive immigration reform, and what, as part of that, people forget, but as part of that Senate bill, there was a merit-based system that was built into that. And of course that was very controversial at that time, but from my perspective as an immigration attorney, I thought it also had a lot of protections for people seeking asylum. It also had revamping of the immigration court system. It also had various pathways for lawful permanent residence. So we came very close. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think that, but for the intransigence and rhetoric, it is within sight, and we can have some sort of resolution to this problem.
Loren, to talk about the DACA for a minute, and this actually came up at a partnership and an upskill meeting immediately in the wake of the storm. But I think DACA is a sort of a trust indicator, and we've had immigration reform before, but it didn't mean that everybody actually availed themselves of that. And we were alarmed to find out that the schools were telling us that they have really now developed robust career and technical training, but that children of immigrants didn't want to actually seek the credential that was coming with their career and technical training because they were afraid of being on someone's radar. And so I think at some point here there's an element of trust, and I think it's hard to navigate economics and good business numbers and then this family issue, but trust is there because we cannot build any measure of trust, then no matter anything we say is purely theoretical if people will not. It's an enforcement only option at that point. And so somewhere this trust has to be repaired to some degree, or at least built in incrementally, or people are going to say, well, where is the farthest off the radar that I can be? And right now I think that's where they are. I mean, as far away from the border, as far away as scrutiny, wherever the least exposure is, I just don't think that sort of priority for people is healthy. It doesn't put people in the right place for the right reason.
Which kind of brings us to the subject of the wall and kind of a lot of the issues around the idea of the wall and maybe, and this is sort of a jump ball, but has the wall already been built in a sense? I mean, has the wall been built of rhetoric and this kind of much more hostile environment? Do we even need a physical wall at this point, given what's going on?
Well, I think that's a very great point, and I think what we're seeing now in terms of the new enforcement priorities from the new administration is just astounding. I mean, really, I follow this every day, and I teach it in my classes. Some of my students are here. We're seeing just last month or January 2018, there was a new ICE guidance that says that they're going to go into courthouses. I mean, this is astounding that they would codify this in a written document saying that they are going to let it be known that they will engage in enforcement activities in courtrooms. So that means family courts, that means civil courts, that means state criminal courts, and they will, again, targeted enforcement, but they will pick people up who have final orders and various other categories. But what it does, I mean, to the points that have been already raised, what it does is it creates a climate of fear and a climate of distrust. And so that's the real wall that's being created every day by the very, very large net that's being cast in the interior of the United States. And so at some point you're going to alienate those people. They're not going to want to come forward, and they're not going to want to apply for DACA, and they're not going to want to apply for relief because they're going to go further and further underground.
And I think it's interesting. I thought the Chronicle came out with a story of the second wall. And the second wall is those people who have made it and are now filing for their green card. That process is taking, here in Houston, anywhere from 13 to 15 months just to get an interview. Those who are applying for citizenship, it's taking another like 14 months before they come for interview. So even if you made it past the first wall, there's the second wall that's discouraging people as well. And so this new policy of hire America, buy American, we're seeing more restrictive interpretations of people applying for visas than ever before. We're looking at how do we begin to go to court more and litigate because the service is pushing the boundaries more so than ever for people who want to do things the legal way.
I just think the wall has become symbolic and of what we don't want, and I just don't see any way that ends well for the country in any way, shape, or form. First of all, I don't know that the physical barrier solves the problem, but the message it stands for is harmful.
Last thing I just want to add, even the wall they're trying to build now before Trump came, The Southern District of Texas has over 100 cases in backlog just on the issue of eminent domain as to whether they can take that land from those landowners in South Texas. And that's just the beginning. So I don't know if this wall ever is going to be built, really, but there's going to be a fight by people before they ever let that wall be built on their land.
Okay, why don't we see if there's some questions here from the audience for the panelists. We have a microphone back here, and
we got a hand right. Oh.
So it seemed to me that the film deals with what you all were hinting at, which are merit-based entry, and we're shifting almost from status-based entry, that is family reunification or amnesty or asylum. And so it seems to me teasing out the other piece of, what does it really mean on status-based, because that feels like where part of the polarization begins to exist. Do you want to kind of tease that out a little bit for us?
Well, there have been a lot of civil rights groups who really have fought hard for the family-based. And if you look at, and maybe I shouldn't mention this, if you look at the visa bulletin that Jeff alluded to, what countries are sending people with skills? And the ones are mainly India's number 1, China's number 2, the Philippines are number 3, Korea's number 4. So we're looking at a change of who's coming, and if we go to a skills-based immigration system, I think we're going to see a different type of immigrant. But if you look at the family base, you see the Latin American countries have the longest backlogs generally. So I don't know if it's pronounced, but there is a change as to who's coming based upon what the criteria is.
The status-based feels a little bit slippery slope-ish, because it then goes where you draw the line, people in a family, what's the nuclear, what's the outer.
Well, status or relationship, you mean? Right. The 2013 bill would have ended brothers and sisters, would have made married sons and daughters have to be under like 35, unmarried sons and daughters, it would put a cap on their age as well. So there was a movement, and has been a movement, toward limiting and forcing people to come on their own merit.
I'm Chuck Grimion. I'm executive director of an organization called the Construction Career Collaborative. And one of the things that I don't hear addressed today is the role or lack of the role of the media in the discussion or the dialogue of this issue. And it's a pet peeve of mine, because I feel like the lack of objectivity in the media today is appalling. And but at the same time, this issue screams for the media to bring it to the forefront in our society today. And yet I don't see anyone other than this group here doing that. And to me, this is not 3 15-minute short films. This is probably a week-long documentary in order to accurately discuss the issue and truly bring it to the forefront of the American public. Because I passionately believe that the American public could experience what we're experiencing tonight. It would change a lot of opinions. But the media honestly disappoints me. And I'll stop there.
well, since I'm somewhat a representative, let me take that. No, I think that one of the things we looked at in making these films was to kind of address that issue. I mean, there's been a lot of media coverage that on a particular issue may be good or bad. Certain papers or news organizations cover policy, for example, better than others. I think the Chronicle has done a good job of documenting some of the immigrant issues here in Houston. But one of the things we wanted to get at was kind of move beyond the individual stories and the anecdotes and get to some of these larger economic issues. And I would agree with you, I don't think there's enough of that type of reporting out there in general. And as to why that is, I mean, we could do a whole separate Rational Middle series on the state of the media, but I do think that part of the reason we're here is because we see that need, and we're hopefully trying to fill that.
John Howard from Justice for Our Neighbors, and a particular question, but I think it provides some context, perhaps by your answer, and that has to do with the crossing without documentation, entering without, what is it? Inspection. If you cross without inspection, is that a misdemeanor?
It is, there's different under 8 U.S.C. 1325 and 1326 are the two statutes, if you want to look it up. 1325 is entry without documentation. They could prosecute, and there are prosecutions for that. The more serious one, the one they're really going to go after you for, is going to be 1326, which is entry after a prior order of deportation. I think, Gordon, you agree with that, right?
Well, I wouldn't. And John, one of the harshest things is that if you make 2 entries, then you have a permanent bar.
Right.
And once you're returned, you cannot come back for at least 10 years. You have to stay out continuously. I have one case, I mean, and I know we don't want to go anecdotally, where a police officer is married to this woman, and he's received all these awards for his service. His wife, because her mother was ill, went back to Mexico. Came back, got caught, returned to Mexico. But she left 3 kids here. She came back to try to take care of her kids, got caught again, got sent to federal penitentiary. But her kids were here, so she came back again. She's it's a heartwarming story to me because the officer really loves his wife and their kids, but there's nothing I can do. There's a permanent bar against that woman. She's a criminal in the eyes of the law, just because she cares about her kids.
The point of my question was to compare it with speeding being a misdemeanor. And I don't know anybody in the country who drives a car who hasn't sped, not been caught, and therefore is a criminal. Is that any way comparable to entering without inspection? I mean, they're both misdemeanors, right?
Well, let me just say one more comment about the illegality issue, because there's a lot of confusion about what's a crime and what's not a crime. So the first point is that people who are in immigration proceedings, removal proceedings, that's a civil proceeding. That's not a criminal proceeding, okay? So, which is kind of bad in a sense, because if you're in a civil proceeding, you have a lot less rights, right? The due process and various right to counsel doesn't exist, et cetera. The other point is that merely being here, so if you overstay a visa, you come in on a B1, B2, you're a visitor for pleasure, and then you overstay that visa. The mere fact of overstaying the visa is not a crime. It's a civil infraction. They can put you in removal proceedings, but that's not a crime. So there are a lot of people, probably millions, who are here without documentation and have not committed a quote-unquote crime. And again, you can't paint with a broad brush. You have to look at every specific situation, and then, as I was saying earlier, take a nuanced approach and apply the laws that exist to each person to see if they have relief or not.
Well, I want to respond to what Chuck said, and I think that Loren and Gregory have adopted this platform because it is exactly the kind of media that needs to be heard, rather than more broadly the mainstream media, which is driven by what I would call extreme ideology. I mean, there are people with a significant dog in the hunt, lots of money driving the story, and there are hundreds of millions of people in this country who either don't feel that way or don't know that would benefit greatly from a discussion about the facts. And if they knew that, I think their conclusions would be startlingly different. So if there was ever a case for the rational middle, it's what can you do? And I think given the explosion of videos and other online mechanisms, this is an easy and powerful way to shout in the face of what seems to be overwhelming opinion.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on that, coming back to this media issue, I mean, the other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of people that understand these issues, that you know, such as employers, they're scared right now. You know, enforcement has been ramped up. You know, they're very afraid of going in front of the camera. You know, certainly the immigrants themselves are very afraid to tell their stories, and so there's that whole aspect of it is much harder to get, and when you're dealing with media that has fewer resources, almost on a daily basis, that contributes to the problem as well. So,
well, one thing I'd say, I think the public is dumbed down, to tell you the truth. The spectacular is what they're looking for. Somebody gets shot, somebody robs a business, and that person's an immigrant. That's what they're looking at. The good stories about those people who create jobs, who come up with wonderful inventions, who help our society, it's boring. Who wants to read those stories? Unfortunately. But, and I know working with Jeff here, we're trying to do this thing called the Arrival Awards, highlighting immigrants who have made a substantial contribution to Houston. And nobody cares about, I'm sorry, about those stories.
We get a lot of people coming to the Arrival Awards. Those people care.
Those people care.
A couple hundred people.
But I was trying to get the editorial board of the Chronicle to say, can we highlight those people? Can we do an Immigrant of the Month or something like that to show the good that people do as opposed to casting them as villains in so many ways?
Great point.
Good evening. My name is Erica. I'm an international student doing an LLM here at the Law Center. I would like to know what are your comments or thoughts about the future for international students after graduation, keeping in mind all this reform and like the option or likelihood of getting a sponsorship is getting every day harder.
Well, I see a lot of international students all the time, and you're right. It's oftentimes the employer doesn't understand the process. As I mentioned before, we're at a low period of unemployment. And if they understood what we have to go through and you have to go through, it's not all that hard sometimes to go through the process. Advertising, posting notice to show that you're not taking a job away from a U.S. worker, but we'd have to look at your skills very carefully. If it's just a general degree, it's more difficult. If it's more specific to a field, the chances are pretty good. So I don't think you should give up. I think you should look and see if somebody has the willingness to go through the process with you.
And I would just add, as with everything in terms of immigration relief, I know it's not necessarily relief, but it is a path for you to stay in the United States after graduation. You need to see a really good immigration attorney, and you need to see somebody like Mr. Quan or a firm that specializes in employment-based immigration. And then, there's a wide variety. Mr. Quan can tell you there's a wide variety of different types of visas, and you got to find the one that's appropriate for you. So don't, just because a friend told you, hey, apply for H-1B, again, you may have another pathway that's better for you. So you really spend $100, get a consultation, and sit down with a really good immigration attorney, because we see people go to attorneys that unfortunately don't know immigration law, and people can get in a lot of trouble that way.
Yeah, just one other thing, this is not really what you were talking about, but I think that, just for the broader audience, I've talked to a number of university officials and professors and whatnot who are very concerned about the current environment and the impact that it's having on foreign students coming here in the first place. A lot of them, foreign student enrollment has declined pretty dramatically at a lot of schools in Texas and elsewhere in the United States as a result of all this. So there's kind of that economic impact as well, if you will.
Yes, Brenda Kirk with the National Immigration Forum. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how Texas has begun to legislate immigration laws. And, as I went to the poll today, the question on the ballot about should Texas mandate E-Verify for all employers, it's really frustrating that we are trying to piecemeal immigration that is clearly a federal issue, and I just think that this documentary, if it could have played during the prime time campaigns that we've seen over the past 2 weeks, really was so needed. So really don't have a question. I just am expressing a level of frustration.
Brenda, thank you for going to the polls and voting, and I hope everybody else did too. We get the state we want. We get the laws we want by how we vote. It frustrates me, as you indicate, we're spending about $100 million on border protection that could go to schools, that could go to other things where it's a federal issue. And we have people stumbling over each other at the border trying to man the border. How we use our resources, how politicians allocate monies, that depends on how the voters vote.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Oh, I don't know if I want to be last then. I'm Jerry Nevlett. I'm President and CEO of the Houston chapter of the Associated General Contractors. And obviously, along with Mike, Jeff, we've been very involved in this issue for many, many years. And we thought the McCain-Kennedy bill was a good bill back however many years ago that was. It was going in the right direction. There's so much here, but Gordon, you made a comment right off the bat that you thought there is a middle ground, and we've talked about that here. But we have an administration that was elected a lot in part because of a whole 50% of the country that sees it a little bit differently than maybe all of us rational middle people here do today. We can't talk about the wall, not for the wall, but wall for DACA or wall for DACA plus. Would that be an option? The president came out and said, okay, we want to stop any immigration from X countries because till we check it. Now, whether you agree with that or not, but we always go to the 9th District Court and we get all that put aside. So we create this wall to try to get to the conversation. You mentioned E-Verify. As a contractor, we don't want that right now because we know we don't have the workforce. But I've had the conversation with, Stan Marek many times. Maybe we need to do that. Then we'll have the pain and people will really see what the issue is. My point being, and the comment is, we here kind of have a solution. There's 50% of the population that doesn't see it that way. So how do we have the conversation, and what to your earlier point, what is that middle that we can get there, that side gets something and this side gets something, and maybe if it's the wall, then you go tear it down 10 years from now because we don't need him. I don't know, but I agree we need the reform, but until we have the true, we just keep missing. We talk past each other on this issue, and until we have the old no pain, no gain, and so I'm just,
I was thinking about this topic. I was in Arkansas yesterday and Oklahoma the day before, and there are broad spotches of the United States that really don't see immigration as we see immigration here in Houston. We see a very multicultural society. We see them as our neighbors, our friends. There's not, probably like 70% of the country, they don't see this mixture of people. And so getting Congress to agree upon something where they my constituents don't understand this is not of concern to us, is really a big hurdle. But Texas has to lead the way. They look to Texas politicians. I'm sure you guys have been to Congress lobbying many times, and I have too. And they'll say, well, if Cornyn does this, or if Cruz shows this, then we can kind of get cover here. And I think that it's important that we really push it with our local politicians, because, again, I'm a Pollyanna on this, but I don't think we're that far apart. The Durbin Graham bill got 54 votes, and now I think it could have gotten up to 60. But we just have to push that a little further. I hope that Trump will be a man of his word and said, if the Senate comes back with it, I'll go with it. and Ryan has the courage to bring it up at the House. If they brought it up in the House, it would pass tomorrow.
Jerry, just real quickly, I think 50% of those who voted, which is an astoundingly low number, said they agreed with what Trump proposed. I mean, the people that are, I'm not saying the people in this room don't vote, but there's an astounding number of people I think who would be more reasonable, whose voices are not heard. And so frustration is going to determine the direction of the day, not the will of the American people, unless they get, I mean, we could have to screw this up to it hurt so bad that people would come out of their house and say, I don't like that. Right now, it does not appear to be at that level. It's sort of a collective yawn.
All right, we're going to wrap it up there, and I'll bring Wendell back in to tie things up for us.
Last thing we'll do is just thank our panel and Loren. Thank you to Gregory and the rest of the Rational Middle team. Please give them a round of applause. And also, please give yourselves a round of applause. You're a great audience. Thank you for your participation. Chris and Zach will be conducting short interviews outside. If any of you want to talk about how great this event was, give a testimonial, get people fired up. Please, this is how we do this, one voice at a time. So feel free to come outside, and Chris can set you up, and we'll just do a quick interview with you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.